Well, good morning. My name is Steve Thayer. Let's get this up here. It's a joy to be here with you this morning as we are sitting worshiping, a wonderful time of worship. I was thinking about the history that I have with this church. I first came acquainted with it when I moved to Enfield in 1996. Your pastor was Rick Porter. We used to meet together to pray and to talk, and he became a very good friend. I think in the interim between he and Tracy, I moderated your session for a while. I was thinking I'd forgotten one thing as we were worshiping, is probably the last time you hosted a Presbyterian meeting from the old country. I remembered that my son was approved for ordination as a pastor, and this is kind of a special place. And I had the privilege of working with the committee from your church as you sought to move into the EPC, and just the joyous ending of that, of being able to come together on that evening and kind of the presbytery bless you as you go, and you bless the presbytery as they continued. I mean, it was wonderful. As I recall, I preached here once and twice. But I think that the last time I preached, I was printing my sermons in 12-point type. They're up to 16 now, probably soon going to 18. But grateful for the opportunity to be here. If you notice that the scriptures from for this morning are from the opposite ends of the Bible. They're from the beginning and from the end. And that's because, I don't know about you, but when I'm listening to a story, reading a book, the most important parts are the beginning and the end. The beginning kind of tells you where you're going and what's it all going to be about. And then the end wraps up and brings everything to a conclusion. And as you know, the Bible is not just a series of stories, but it is essentially one story. It is the story of God. And we see that the story of God begins and it ends in the same way. It begins and it ends with a beautiful vision of a beautiful world. It begins and it ends with what is called in Scripture the concept of shalom, which is usually translated peace. But if we think of it only in terms of absence of conflict or absence of war, we completely miss the richness of what the Scriptures intend. God's shalom, God's peace, is more than just the absence of conflict. It's more than just reconciliation, as good as those things are, but it expresses this state of wholeness, the state of flourishing. It is a linking together of God and humanity and all creation into the fullness and justice and delight that God intended for every part of creation. And that's essentially the beginning and the end of the Scripture. And if you want to sum up the whole rest of the story, if anyone asks you to sum up the Bible in 4 words, I can tell you how to do it. Tracy's also probably taught you. One of the problems of preaching in a place where it's a really good preacher, you have to say, well, am I going to be able to tell these people anything new? But we'll try. The whole story of the Bible, the whole story of God can be summed up in 4 words. There's creation, there's fall, there's redemption, and then there's restoration. There's creation. The Bible begins with God's beautiful image of shalom in Genesis 1 and 2. We see that God created the heavens and the earth and the plants and the animals, and the pinnacle of his creation. God created humans, male and female, in his own image. And, God looked at what he made in the scripture that we read for this morning, and he said, that's okay. No, he said it was very good. And in the Hebrew, that means very good. And what we have in those first 2 chapters of Genesis is a picture of God's intent, what he intended this world and human beings to be in relationship with himself, and it is very, very good. And if the end of the story was there, then everybody would live happily ever after. But we know that that wasn't how it ended, and then we go into chapter 3 of Genesis, which leads to the problem, and that has to do with the fall. God's peace, God's shalom, was shattered by the fall. Our first parents had the choice. Are we going to live according to the ways of God, or are we going to go according to our own wisdom, supposed wisdom? And they chose to do it by themselves. And it's the same choice, by the way, that we make daily, hourly, most of the time. And what we see in the scripture is that of course, ruptures the relationship between the man and the woman. It ruptures the relationship between them and God. And indeed, if we moved out into Paul's letter of the Romans, all of creation, as a result of that, has come to turmoil and chaos. Nothing is as God intended it to be. And that's the problem that we've been dealing with ever since. Well, the third, and so then the rest of the story of the account is the account of God's work of redemption. God's work to restore the shalom, the peace, the flourishing, the wholeness that was broken by the fall, not first in the human's heart, but also spreading out to all things. And that story, as we know, finds its fulfillment in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, we are reconciled with God. We can be reconciled with one another. Through Jesus Christ, the ultimate power of sin and the curse has been defeated, and God's kingdom has been established. And God is on the move, seeking to reform and remake and renew all things back to his original intent. Now, we live in the in-between times when God has won the victory, the enemy has been defeated, and God's purposes have not yet been brought to completion. We can see in our day, at best, glimpses of God's victorious kingdom. We see it in the lives of people who have been forgiven and renewed and made whole in Jesus Christ. And though we long to see it more and more, sometimes we wonder, is it real? Is it real? And that's kind of the tension that we live in right now. God's kingdom is at work in powerful ways. But there is still this fallen world which seeks to drag everything down. Well, our lessons for this morning give us a vision, a glorious vision for God's end of it all, and that is restoration. And to do that, we're looking primarily at the book of Revelation. Now, I know the book of Revelation is intimidating to some people. Many Christians look at it in terms